think it's here. Yo, yo! What's up, man?
My name is Chris Jansen. I'm from Roslyn, Washington, and here we have one of Leo Fender's early bench amps, a 1946 Deluxe Model 26 Fender Woody amp. So this was originally one of Leo's shop amps that he kept in the shop for a long time. I think was continually tinkering with and making modifications. And this amp was designed in '46 to accompany steel guitars that were in production at the time. This predates any of the solid body guitars that would come later. So my great grandfather was David K. Driver, and in 1947 he answered a classified ad, and he was one of Leo's first traveling salesmen, basically. His tenure lasted until 1965. Charlie Hayes was already a salesman in the Southwest, traveling all the way out east to Texas. And it was determined basically that my grandfather was going to travel north from Northern California up to Washington and then all the way east out to Minnesota. So in 1947, when my grandfather showed up to the factory in Santa Ana, it was nothing more than just a small warehouse. And it was quickly determined that there was a lot of work to do in order to sell these Fender instruments at the time. And a lot of it was lap steels, early Fender amps such as this in '46 and '47 and '48. Basically until the advent of the solid body guitar in 1950. At the time they were transitioning away from a radio shop into more of a Fender instrument shop, selling amps and guitars. So the funny thing is, in early '47 when he started and went out on the road, he didn't even have one of these in his car as he traveled. He had a mimeographed sheet that had Bob Wills and Spade Cooley playing the steel guitar and playing Fender amps. In 1951, Gretsch sent their cease and desist letter to Fender regarding the naming rights to the broadcaster. It was my grandfather who came up with the idea of putting out a contest in an effort to rename the guitar. After a couple of months of no quality names coming forth, Don Randall and Jody Carver came up with the name Telecaster. So what you see in this amp that you don't see in a lot of other Model 26s are a few things. You've got these different tuning knobs that you just won't see on another Model 26 anywhere, round tuning knobs. And we do have one of the chicken head knobs here on the tone. Other than that, the other thing that you're going to see different is a 1936 Philco tube-out transformer that is kind of wild and you just don't see in other Model 26s at all. In fact, when this was cut into the chassis, part of the top of the chassis had to be taken off in order to fit this in because it just didn't fit this chassis. So whoever did it at the time cut out with a chisel on the right side of the body here of the amp so that this transformer could slide in, which is just kind of a really unique thing that you just don't see on other Model 26s. The thing I really like about this amp is that it's a little bit more dressed up than any of the predecessors that you would see from K&F. We finally have a nice Fender badge on here, which has just the coolest of all logos. And it's just got all the little details on it that really gave, I think, Leo, a chance to send something out that would have been really sought after. So if you pull the chassis out, there are some embossed, rusted in fingerprints. And you can tell that there was just a lot of work done on this amp over the years. There's just a lot of, you can tell fingerprints in there and just lots of work that's been done on it versus a normal production Model 26 that you'll see, out and about. I mean, you're gonna lose some tubes from now and again, I'm sure, as you know. Transformers are also one of the first things to go. And we do have one replaced tube that's in here in this chassis, and this is still original, the original transformer. So it's just really kind of cool to see such an old amp and still such a pretty original shape. The original Jensen speaker in here, which is obviously a really cool speaker. Now, it's never been cleaned. If you pull the chassis out, you'll see there's just completely original wiring, completely original dust out of Southern California. Well, my grandfather passed away in 1991, which meant that I got the first 14 years of my life I got to spend with my grandfather down in Southern California in the summer months. And it was just a really neat thing that our family had. In the early years, my grandfather didn't play guitar, but he did play harmonica. So he'd play the harmonica through this amp to us as kids, and it was just something super neat. At the time, as kids, we didn't understand the importance of the amp itself and the Fender name really at all. But it was just super neat for us to be able to tie this in later And my Uncle Tim, driver, who gave me this amp here a couple months ago, it had been in his care for a long time, and he finally passed it on to me, which is just a really neat thing. Appreciate it, Tim. It's just a neat amp, and it's a great piece of our family history. So one of the coolest memories we have of this amp is actually my mom was able to dig it up from some old VHS videos that we had from way back, and it's a cool little clip of my granddad playing harmonica, Fender harmonica, through this amp and through this little handheld harmonica microphone that's been with the amp ever since. At one point, actually for a long part of this amp's life, it was the color black. My granddad had painted the entire cabinet black. And the reason I think he did that, he was very fond of the black color. Originally, the first Esquire that was ever sent out from Leo's bench in 1950, April of 1950, was a black Esquire. And I think he got a really resounding response, with the black instrument. So he painted this thing black, and in a lot of the early pictures, some of the booklets, you can actually see this amp painted black, which I think wasn't the prettiest thing ever. But later in its life, when my Uncle Tim took this thing into custody, he miraculously stripped all of the black paint off of it, back to its original classic Fender Woody look, and I think it looks great. Trevor and I have looked at this thing pretty closely, and it's pretty amazing how good of a job he did stripping the black paint off it, the original. So yeah, it's had some interesting transitions in its life, and for me, the fact that it was painted black and now is back to its original color, I just think it makes the story that much more interesting. So luckily, I know some guys that own a pretty kick-ass guitar and amp shop, so I brought it down here to these guys, said, Trevor, I got a piece that you need to see. And I said I can come down on Thursday. I think I drove over on a Thursday morning and brought this amp in, and I was just really, curious to know what to do with this thing. Do I insure it? Do I clean it? Do I fix anything that isn't working on it? Because at the time I didn't know if it was in working order or not. So when I brought it into to the shop here, we had a little fun with it. We pulled it apart, took a close look at it, and luckily, and I agree totally with you guys 100%, we didn't clean a thing. And after we decided that, we said, hey, why don't we plug it in and see if it works? And amazingly, we plugged it in, and that soft, beautiful hum came about, the tubes lit up, and the hair on the back of my neck completely stood up. And it was one of the most amazing, little glimpses of history that just kind of came back to life. We plugged in a 1950 really minty broadcaster, which is just the other thing about this story that's just kind of floors me, is that my granddad for sure sold that guitar in 1950 in South Dakota. All right, man, should we plug it in?
Yeah, let's do it.